Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington, joined by our political director, Rick Klein, and our Capitol Hill reporter, Ben Siegel. On this Monday, as Mueller is winding down, the Hill is ramping up. Major investigations now underway. Ben, give us the headline here. We've just learned that the House Judiciary Committee has sent document request letters to over 80, count them, 80 individuals in President Trump's orbit. What does this all mean?
That's right. Well, this is what divided government looks like in Washington when you have a president and now you have some antagonists on Capitol Hill with subpoena, with oversight power in the House. Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler of New York, he teased this yesterday on This Week. He and his committee have sent out letters, requests for documents with more than 80 entities. That's the Trump inaugural, the Trump Foundation, members of the president's family, people who used to work in the White House, people in the campaign, and they're concerned with obstruction of justice, potentially allegations of obstruction of justice, allegations of corruption. What they say, this is a fact-finding mission. Of course, this is important because this committee, as you know, is the one that would take up any sort of impeachment of the president.
And Rick, this is just to remind everybody, as the special counsel is literally wrapping up, we expect that report to come very soon. This is something now that we're just beginning. This is a process, as Ben was saying, that will look a lot like impeachment, smell like impeachment, but whatever it is, it sure is going to stretch into the end of the president's first term.
This is one of the most important signals that we'll see out of divided government, to Ben's point, about how Democrats are approaching the Trump presidency. Could they try to impeach? Sure. Jerry Nadler just said that yesterday. Yes, we think obstruction of justice has occurred, but they're deciding not to do that. They're deciding to go broader. And in some ways, it may be a riskier bet because they're going to be on a lot of fishing expeditions trying to find something. And for a president that we know is already fired up about what he views as just the bunch of Democratic witch hunts, it's going to give them more fodder to say, look, the people are just runaway investigators just investigating because they want to slow this presidency to a halt. All of these folks are going to have to take a lot of time to respond. You know there's going to be issues. They're going to have to issue some subpoenas. They're going to have to force people in. It's going to be a messy process, a long, drawn-out process. And you're right, Devin, there's no way that all of these different strands could get wrapped up in time for the election. No chance.
So this is going to be in the background as the 2020 campaign heats up. And here's what Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler, had to say about what he's looking for in an interview yesterday with George. Take a listen.
There can be crimes that are not impeachable offenses and impeachable offenses that are not crimes. They're just two different tests. And we have to focus much more broadly on abuses of power and what I said a moment ago.
So, Ben, what exactly, when we hear document requests, that's such a broad thing, what sorts of things is the committee asking for from this laundry list of Trump people? What do they want?
It's the brushstrokes are pretty broad. We've done a look. Our team has looked through all 81 letters that have gone out, and every one is different depending on the person and what they were involved with in the Trump campaign. For Jared Kushner, for example, there's a request for documents and records, which is sort of a broad request, but it's language relating to anything with that Trump Tower meeting. For other people, it's about the inaugural committee. For others, it's about potential conflicts of interest, firing of Jim Comey. So
even the president's secretary, Rona Graff, is in there, and they want any emails from her, paperwork from her related to any number of topics. So imagine it's going to take some time to pull all that stuff together. Here's what the president had to say just a few minutes ago about whether he plans to cooperate with this request.
I cooperate all the time with everybody. And you know the beautiful thing? No collusion. It's all a hoax. You're going to learn about that as you grow older. It's a political hoax. There's no collusion. There's no anything. Folks, go and eat up. Eat up.
And to your point, Rick, we heard from Sarah Sanders also in addition to the president saying they're taking a look at this. They're in due course going to maybe consider turning over documents. This is in the very early stages. And in fact, the White House may want to draw this out as long as possible.
Yeah, there may be some political advantage to them, to the perception of the Democrats trying to litigate everything and find every document. I'm curious how they follow this up, because you know there's going to be folks who say, I'm not giving that to you, or I'm going to take my sweet time. So what kind of teeth do they put into the next round of requests? What court fights do they have to pursue? Because they're going to have to fight this every step of the way. We know the White House, as the president says, he cooperates with everyone. That's not actually how it works, guys. Hoping not no spoilers here, but it's going to be a lot more complicated than that, and that's where it's going to get really interesting with all of these overlapping committees. This is just Judiciary. You also have House Oversight, which did Michael Cohen just last week. Of course, the Intelligence Committee, which is bringing Michael Cohen back again. So there is a lot suddenly moving just a couple months into the year.
And we're not even talking about tax returns. I mean, that's the big thing. The president's tax returns turns Democrats so what, that's a whole different conversation.
And we're not talking about subpoenas yet. This
Exactly.
is the opening shot.
Right.
There will be subpoenas. Those will be challenged, so there will be quite a lot of fight to come. Ben, thanks so much for that. Shifting gears slightly, we're going to bring in our Catherine Faulders now, our investigative reporter. Speaking of different committees, the House Oversight Committee is investigating the security clearance issue at the White House. And we got some news, Catherine, on Friday that Jared Kushner, the president's personal advisor, son-in-law, received the highest level security clearance in the White House, overriding the decision of the vetting process, the president saying give it to him. The committee wants answers. Are they going to get it from this White House? Are they going to turn over documents?
That's a good question. The president says he'll cooperate with anything, right? No, but the bottom line here, though, is that this ramped up even more significantly when the New York Times reported that John Kelly, the former chief of staff, and Don McGahn, the former White House counsel, put in writing that they were ordered by the president to give his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, security clearance. And I think that raised a lot of red flags because the president himself has said that he wasn't involved in this at all. And on the record interview with the Times, Ivanka Trump, his daughter, told ABC that they were given no special treatment. So the bottom line here is that after that report came out, Cummings sent a letter to the White House counsel and is demanding a response by today. Now, if history is anything with the White House responding to Cummings' letters, I don't think that we will see any documents from the White House today. Maybe a letter just responding broadly, but nothing that will give them more information.
And Rick, the committee wants to know what information did these intelligence assessors have that the president overrode? In other words, what concerns about Jared Kushner were so high that they block his clearance and the president overrode it? We don't know what connections, what flaws, what issues may be related to him that cause this problem.
That's right. There are two very separate issues here that they'd be looking at. One is, well, just to acknowledge the president has the right to do this. It's something the president can do. He can just overrule the intelligence community. Anyone who wants to do anything, well, he says, well, no, I want this done. Question one is, did he lie about it? Did he mislead people? Because he has said directly, as Ivanka did as well, that the president saying he was not involved in anything with security clearances. But second to that is, what was the underlying concern? We know about his very complicated business relationships. We know about the attempts by the Kushner organization to try to get something of a bailout for a particular building in Manhattan that it may have involved foreign investors. So there's a lot of things they could have been concerned about. But yes, what exactly held them up and gave them any pause, that becomes very important.
And you remember that Jared has had problems with his security clearance in the White House previously. It was a year and a half into his job in the White House until he was granted full security clearance. And then Kelly had previously downgraded his clearance prior to that when there were issues surrounding staffers in the White House who had temporary security clearances. So while they're focusing on Jared Kushner and then the memos, alleged memos from Kelly and Don McGahn are specifically about Kushner, there's also more questions surrounding other White House officials and clearance issues as well.
So we know you'll stay on the case today. The Oversight Committee, again, expecting to hear from the White House, demanding to hear from the White House by the end of the day today on documents pertaining to Jared Kushner, his security clearance, how he got that clearance. Stay tuned. We'll have more tomorrow. Thanks, Catherine Faulders, for that. Meanwhile, up on Capitol Hill, they're challenging the president's policies, specifically that national emergency declaration for the southern border, his money grab there, Rick. This is very interesting because the stage does seem to be set now for the first veto of the Trump presidency, with a number of Republican senators now getting on board with a vote to terminate the national emergency.
Yes, Senator Mitch McConnell, the majority leader, acknowledging that the votes appear to be there to actually approve this this disapproval, to send it back to the president and say, no, we don't want you to do this. Now, technically what happens next, the president vetoes it. It doesn't look like the votes will be there to override. So ultimately the policy goes into effect and then it gets challenged in the court. But the president has never issued a veto before. For him to have to issue his first one on this issue of a national emergency, you remember he poured all of his energy into this, basically the whole month of January, with the government shut down, several primetime address plus a State of the Union, making the case for this national emergency. That would be a pretty big blow politically to a president who's been able to count on his party to come through for him. And I think there'll be more defections. I'm looking at some of the senior Republicans. Look at Lamar Alexander from Tennessee, who's retiring.
Spoke out last week on this.
That's right, warning on this. Look at Mitt Romney. What does he do as the now freshman senator from Utah? There's a lot of conservatives that are deeply uncomfortable by this. And that's why Senator Rand Paul from Mitch McConnell's home state of Kentucky came out and said, actually, this is not something I'm comfortable with. That's what put it over the edge and is going to force this first presidential veto.
And let's take a listen to some of those Republicans Rick's talking about. Already on the record, Tom Tillis, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski. We caught up with them a little while ago today about why they plan to vote to terminate the president's emergency. Take a listen.
The failure of Congress to pass funding in the amount the president prefers cannot become an excuse for the president to usurp the powers of the executive branch.
I've just seen a disturbing trend over time, not in this administration, but past administrations, past Congresses that are conferring power to the executive branch that I think are within the purview of Congress.
I'm going to be voting yes on the resolution of disapproval.
And as Rick mentioned, the straw that broke the camel's back on this one was Senator Rand Paul there on the left. He tweeted over the weekend that after much deliberation, he is now going to vote in favor of that termination declaration. Let's bring in our Trish Turner. She's up on Capitol Hill, senior producer for us. Trish, this has got to be a blow to the president. This isn't the House Democrats. This is members of his own party, including a close ally, Rand Paul.
Well, something of a blow, but I might play devil's advocate with you a little bit here. So Mitch McConnell's been warning him not to do this. He was warning him for quite some time, but this isn't a president that really likes to take those warnings to heart. And this is an issue that's like red meat to his base. So I don't think he really, yes, we will perceive it as a blow and it will be his first veto. But if you're looking at it through the prism of 2020 politics and this president's base, what better than to do something on the issue of border security? This is what he likes to talk about. This is his signature campaign issue. So why not challenge Congress? Why not challenge the swamp and say, I'm going to stand up to these members of Congress that, I'm going to stand up to those members in Washington and I'm going to do this. And quite frankly, when McConnell warned him, he didn't take it to heart. He went ahead and did it anyway. And now McConnell turned around and supported him. So I do agree with you guys. I do, Rick is saying that he thinks there will be more members to come. We've been waiting for this. We know there'll be more members to come. It's always difficult to be that one that puts it over the edge, but Rand Paul doesn't mind about that. But Romney, some of the others that are having a little more difficult time, the law and order guys, the institutional guys like Lamar Alexander, who you recognize there, there will be more to come. We do not think in either the House or the Senate, though, they can muster a veto-proof majority. So there's that.
All right, Trish Turner for us on Capitol Hill. Thanks so much, Trish. And as Trish pointed out, Rick, you do need to have that veto-proof majority. So in any event, we didn't expect that to happen in this case. So it does look like it will go through. Now the president just has to identify which targets in the Pentagon budget he wants to shift money away from, which will be a whole other fight on its own.
That's right, and the legal challenges that have already begun are going to happen regardless of any of that.
2 lawsuits, 16 states, a number of landowners down in Texas as well challenging this. Those I don't think have even had the first day of hearing in federal court yet. We could still see an injunction against construction there on the border as well. Let's move to your wheelhouse a little more explicitly. Now, with the 2020 field getting a heck of a lot bigger over the weekend, when is this thing going to stop? We had 14 candidates, 2 governors into the race for the first time just in the past few days. I think let's take a look at the field. We have the list of faces if you're not keeping track at home.
You should be.
An extraordinary field of Democratic candidates with many more still waiting in the wings. The 2 newest, Rick, Jay Inslee, the governor of Washington State. Today on Good Morning America, John Hickenlooper, former governor of Colorado, getting in. Let's take one of these at a time. Rick, tell us about Jay Inslee. He's come out as sort of the climate change candidate.
Yeah, and first, one interesting point, these last 2 are governors, and they're the first 2 governors out of this entire list of 14. A bunch of senators, former House members, and even a mayor of South Bend, Indiana, as part of that. But this is the first time we're seeing governors. That's traditionally, they've done pretty well in presidential nominating contests. Jay Inslee from Washington State had a very successful run with the Democratic Governors Association last cycle, and he is basically running on one issue, or putting one issue first and foremost, and that's the environment. That's climate change, global warming. He has said this is the existential threat. It is the challenge of our generation, the challenge maybe of our lifetimes, and he is putting everything on that and hoping to break through with one big issue that he hopes will become his calling card. It's a bold strategy, but it might be the kind of thing you need if you're someone like Jay Inslee from a kind of obscure corner of the country. Love Washington State, but it's not Washington,
Not a lot
DC.
of name recognition with either of these 2 guys.
Jay Inslee's going to have that problem, and so if he becomes the candidate of climate change, we know it's an issue, particularly with younger voters. You you can draw a very clean contrast with a president who denies that climate change is real or an issue. And so it could be something that gets him some momentum down the line.
Now, how about John Hickenlooper here, the former governor, a moderate, someone who prides himself on being a moderate, looks a lot like Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, except he's not a senator, has the executive experience. Talk about his record. He's sort of running on the economic growth thing. He turned Colorado around, set up a craft brewery, so he's kind of got that common man thing going on. But again, low name recognition. Yeah, what do you make of John?
I'm thinking Hickenlooper. There's a lot of fodder for a presidential nickname based on that name, so the name recognition might change yet. I think Governor Hickenlooper, he's called himself a radical moderate, a centrist through and through. His answer to George Stephanopoulos today about how you'd fix Washington, saying I talked to Mitch McConnell and let's figure out what the problem is. That's been his calling card in Colorado, a state that has a lot of Republicans in it. It has traditionally been a red state. It's more purple now, maybe even bluish under his leadership. He's got a good record, as you mentioned, a business record included, and he has a reputation for working with people from both parties. Does that sell? He may be the most moderate, so to speak, in this field among maybe first-tier candidates of senators and governors. To make that your calling card, when we see how the base, we saw the energy over the weekend again. Bernie Sanders already drawing enormous rallies. Elizabeth Warren and Harris and Booker, so many of them are looking at the left. He's saying, let's look at the center. Let's be realistic about where this country is. And yes, we're in the age of Trump, where the rules may be different, but the idea of a pragmatic leader to move the country forward, that's what he's going to say.
As we've seen in this field of so many candidates, this does seem to be a year for Democrats of diversity, embracing diverse candidates, women, minority candidates. In fact, over the weekend, we saw many of these: Bernie Sanders, Cory Booker, Sherrod Brown, link arms with Hillary Clinton down in Selma, Alabama on the anniversary of the Bloody Sunday riots there. I mean, is it harder this cycle for two white men to compete in a primary when diversity and giving women a platform, minority candidates a platform is such a top priority in the Democratic base?
It is interesting because white men are likely to be the minority in this field. First time in American history that you'll have a field that looks like this. And they're being forced to answer the question, why should you get elected when white men have had so many advantages over the years? Usually that question's been in reverse. How can you, as an African American or a Latino, how can you relate to the full country? Or a female candidate with groundbreakers like Hillary Clinton? It has reversed the calculus. I think one thing to look at is it sort of limits the potential pairings for running mates as well. The idea of two white men becoming the presidential and vice presidential nominee, basically a non-starter. There's been a Biden-Beto rumor for a long time. I think most Democrats that are in the know on this say that just is not realistic for where the party is these days. So it's changed some of the expectations. It also means that any traditional way to lock up a segment of voters, I think, is going to be out the window. There's not going to be one candidate for African American voters or for Latino voters or for LGBT voters or for female voters. There are going to be multiple candidates who all make appeals at different segments. And I think it's going to reflect the true diversity, not just kind of the paper diversity that is the Democratic Party.
Going to be fascinating to watch. We know you'll be on the case, Rick. But speaking of diversity and appealing to women voters, we know that the president in 2016 relied on his wife to get out there, do some of that courting, Melania Trump. Well, she's back on the trail today. She's actually taking a tour of the country on her own. 2-day, 3-state tour for the Be Best initiative. Here she is today in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Perhaps a warm-up for the 2020 reelect, getting out there and doing some public appearances. She's kept a pretty low profile. Today she says she's encouraging kids to show kindness in their lives, talk about character, strong values. Every time I see this, Rick, I'm struck by this sort of the split screen between the message she's pushing and what we see her president doing. She constantly pushes back on that, but clearly that's sort of not lost on anybody as they watch her.
Yeah, and I think the split screen is it's a fact of life. It's not going to change. She is not going to change her husband's behavior. She's going to talk about these issues. She's going to be unapologetic in talking about these issues and unapologetic to some degree in how she addresses it and saying that there's a difference here, to take her at face value for what she does. And I think for a large segment of the country that know about who the president is and how he acts, this disconnect almost doesn't matter. And you have to just kind of factor it out. It is what it is. We will all point it out. Rightfully, we should be pointing out these instances. But she's going to go out there where she is a lot more popular than her husband and pushing issues that she feels passionately about.
A lot more popular indeed in polls that just came out in the past few days as well. Melania Trump tour. We'll be following it this week. Thanks for that, Rick. Great to have you with us.
Thank you, Devin.
In the briefing room as always. Thank you for watching us here at ABC News Live. We'll be back 3:30 Eastern Time tomorrow. Be sure to download the ABC News app to follow the latest on these and all the stories we're following today. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. We'll see you next time.